I really just said that. I mean, I think the reality is that period is critical. The other second point on that slide is equally important, that no matter what we do now, we are going to have climate change probably for 80 to 100 years. We are going to have to adapt to that. We have to learn how to see our way through that, try not to say survive, because that's a bit too dramatic, but we have to see ways that we can adapt to the changes that will happen in the Highlands, in Scotland, and around the United Kingdom. So to do that, what do we have to do? I think it's about creating the information base, and SNH, I think, have a key role in doing that for the natural environment. It's about telling people what's happening around us, in the Highlands and Inverness, around the country. But it's then also trying to build some kind of support there for people to take action and for government to lead. And I think, really, if you look at the Scottish perspective on this, it is hugely encouraging, actually, that we are building such demanding targets over the climate change bill that will go through government. I'm sure John Mason will tell us more about this shortly. But I think when you look in a European context and globally, then Scotland really could steal a march and lead in many different ways. The key point underneath all that is, I think when you look at government, industry, individuals, no one sector can tackle this on their own. They really have got to work together. It has to be a collective effort. I want to move to the second part of the talk just in a minute that looks specifically at the Highlands. But just before I do that, the main point really from climate change science, if you like, is that it links to everything. It links to clean water, to biodiversity, to air quality, to the whole forest industry that we have. I've just pulled out a few examples, but the concept of one individual sector tackling this on its own really won't work, that it has to be this collective, it has to be this coordinated approach that we take. And again, I think in doing that, any one part of Scotland, or Scotland as a whole, could demonstrate to others how an adaptation plan and strategy can be built. We worry a lot about China, about India, and you hear as Mas said, the reasons not to take action. We're such a small country, it wouldn't make any difference. We're only one individual. What can I do? I think the reality is individuals, councils, governments can actually have a huge impact by being exemplars, by demonstrating what can be done. And that's certainly where I would like to see Scotland getting to, that we can be an exemplar for wider change. The key point here is it's really all about linkage. That's the first 10 minutes is really just by way of background to give a little bit of context to the remainder of the talk, which I want to kind of home in on where we are today and see what's happening, and then just speculate a little bit about what we could maybe do to help things. Again, looking at the Scottish climate for a minute or two, a year or two ago in SNH we were having debates about what was happening, and was the climate changing, was temperature increasing, rainfall increasing around Scotland. And the reality then, talking to others in SEPA, Forestry Commission, was we didn't actually have one definitive record of what was happening. We knew the Met Office had got all the information, but we had no summary. So we commissioned a report jointly between various organisations to pull together the data, the information on climate, so that we could be very clear about what was actually happening. And that really proved to be a good idea to do that, but it proved really illuminating in terms of what it showed. So one or two pictures just to show you. Temperature from 1914 to 2004. You can see it does fluctuate quite widely year by year, but actually the overall trend really from the mid-70s, when I was a boy, I have to say, but nothing to do with that, has been increasing. That if you look at North Scotland, East Scotland and West, and we thought it would be worth looking at different parts of the country, the trend is very similar. It is quite a dramatic increase in temperature overall. And then the converse of that, if you look at Scottish air frost, and this is again quite dramatic, again for all three parts of the country, we are seeing quite a steady decline in frost, and I think you all see that in your own gardens and around as you go through the winter. And then in terms of rainfall, we're also seeing quite dramatic changes, with West and North Scotland showing quite dramatic changes again over that 70s till now period. East of Scotland, less of an increase, but still a gentle increase through the period. The main point behind all that is that when you put all that together, it has an impact. And one of the clear impacts that we're seeing, and we're obviously interested from SNH in terms of the natural world, and farmers will be as well from their industry, is that the length of the growing season in Scotland in days from 1961 to 2004 has increased quite dramatically. And you can see that in that sort of general trend, again, for all three parts of the country. Now, that may be a helpful thing. You can probably grow crops for longer, but I suspect it probably changes the whole soil biology, the whole need for fertilizers. There's a whole lot of changes that come behind that. I know, talking to colleagues in the Forestry Commission, that they have issues about how long trees will grow for. That's maybe positive in one sense, but if they're having to clear vegetation, then they have to do that longer and for a more intense period than they maybe had in the past. So there's pluses and minuses to do with this in terms of the climate, and then particularly in relation to the length of the growing season. Looking at the natural world around us, we've got lots of examples now of things changing quite dramatically, and I thought I'd put just a few in just to show you and to make a couple of points. Butterflies, 2 species, mountain ringlet has moved uphill quite dramatically, and the Scotch Argus has moved north. I think you would probably say that's really interesting and that's fantastic. Well, in a way it is, but actually when you put all the changes together, it does tend to add up to quite a radical shift in terms of what's happening to the natural world. Another very neat study that some of you may have seen before was done by Fred Last, who's a colleague that used to work in the Institute of Biology. A very good scientist, but what he did very simply was every year he went out and measured the first day that he saw flowers in his own garden actually coming into flower. Dead simple. And what he did, he kept doing that every year from 78 till 2001, and he got quite a dramatic change in the pattern from some species that were 3 weeks early over that time, 2 weeks early, 1 week early. And again, that's interesting, and in terms of Fred's garden, it probably makes it nicer early in the year. But actually, when you're looking at the link from plants to the insects that would pollinate them to production in an agricultural sense, you begin to see things becoming a bit out of kilter. And if flowers are 3 weeks early, what happens to the insects that eat them? What happens to the birds that eat the insects? It becomes quite a changing pattern. And I'm sure you've all seen this in the Highlands, that you'll see trees flowering, or you'll see different things that you never saw 10 or 20 years ago. That is the concern. When you put all that together into the effects, and we have got data on effects in the marine environment, huge changes in terms of plankton distribution, in fish population distribution, that you would speculate in years to come would have quite a dramatic impact on the fishing industry itself. We've got changes in bird populations, habitat changes themselves. What that builds to is down in the bottom corner in relation to the ecosystem, and why am I particularly concerned about it? It is because of this loss of synchrony, disruption of processes, and the whole new relationships that can be set up, especially if there are alien, non-native species around that can adapt maybe quicker or better to a new climate than some of our native species can. So the changes are happening. We are measuring them really quite closely. It's a challenge then to see what we can do about it. And I think this overhead probably may help in terms of discussion later on. Again, picking up something Matt said, I think there's a lot that we can do about this, and it's not really a fatalistic, let's just sit back and let it happen. If you look at any area, but if we take the one on my right-hand side, working with the grain of local change, I think there's a lot we can do there in terms of river floodplain management. We can look at retreat management, we can look at the coast, we can look at moors management, and that's what I want to do for the last 5 or so minutes in the talk, is to look at what we can actually do in different habitats, different areas around. Again, the key point is that we've put together some information from our perspective. We'd be very interested to hear from other folks' perspectives in terms of what can be done. The key observation from that point of the talk then is the climate in Scotland and in the Highlands is changing really quite dramatically and in ways that we've never seen before. The natural world is changing rapidly and in ways that we've never seen before. Any one change in its own is probably nothing too much to panic about. The combined effect becomes quite a concern in terms of recognising Scotland as we know it in terms of species makeup. Things will adapt. I mean, that's the other positive thing to say. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Things will change and there will be a natural adaptation that comes with it as well. Just to move on then, to look at 4 examples of what I think are the key challenges really in relation to the Highlands in particular, but you can take this for most of Scotland actually as well. I've pulled out 4 coastal areas, upland areas, soils, which are really important, and then what we can do in relation to buildings.